One of the issues we discussed in this community is that the Muslim will eventually apply the Sharia law in the United States way of living. Dr. Dr. Amir Boozari is a law professor at UCLA who's teaching Islamic law. I'm sure that every religion has their own religious law versus the civil law that we have in this or every country. I lived 30 years of my life in Iran and 33 years in the United States. In other 30 years, I never heard of Sharia law. And even now, the Sharia law is not a common practice in the Muslim countries such as Iran. And my question is that what the panelists think, started Dr. Boozari about this Sharia law, and what the other distinguished speakers think about the religious law versus civil law that we have in this country.
The term Sharia in Islam means path to waterhole. In fact, the word Sharia has been repeated only once or twice in the whole text of the Quran. And it's amazing that everything is being ascribed to Sharia as a wrong and probably false perception of the idea of law in Islam. Sharia by Islamic jurists, by Muslims, have been perceived as an ideal law that has been and is now in the mind of God. So Muslim jurists have always been striving to figure out what exactly is in God's mind. So there is no predetermined set of laws that you can tell it is Sharia. Sharia, the most that Muslim jurists have agreed upon and are comfortable to call Sharia are worshiping laws, how we offer our prayers to God, how we do our fastings and our pilgrimage to the Mecca. And that only takes 10% of everything that you can call law in Islamic legal tradition. Anything else goes to the category of what we call mu'amalat, or transactional relationship between the individuals and the state, among the individual and the individual, and it's subject to human agents' understanding of the presupposition and perception of law, which is required for an orderly society. That is called fiqh, jurisprudence, in other words. So, for the most part, Muslim jurists, even if they used the word Sharia, they meant fiqh. They didn't mean their findings to be exactly the finite discovery of what God has in His mind. That's why in Islam, in Islamic jurisprudence, in Islamic law, we have the provision of absence of finality of opinions. That means jurists' opinions are never final, because we just can get close to what God has in His mind. So for the most part, again, there is a strong mundane aspect to what we call Islamic law or Islamic legal tradition. What we know as Sharia is how we perform our prayers, how we do our ablutions and get clean before we get starting our prayers, how we fast, and all those worshiping and devotional duties and activities. How do we offer our charities to the poor and to the people in need? How do we pay our zakat, which is a alms tax required to be paid by individual Muslims? So for the most part, Islamic law is like every other legal tradition in the world, the outproduct, or if you will, byproduct of human intellect's findings of the needs and requirements of an orderly society. Protection of individual rights, promotion of proprietary rights of every individual. In Islamic law, there are 5 major objectives, maqasid al-Sharia. They are protection of life, protection of property, protection of intellect, protection of property, and protection of family. Honor and family. Now, Muslim jurists always take these 5 major maqasid, objectives, goals of Sharia, into account when they seek through the texts that we have, be it the Quran, be it the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, or previous jurists' opinions, as to finding out what exactly the most proper law should be for a society. Nowadays, even in Iran, which is claiming to have all his laws complied with Sharia, there is a huge disagreement among Muslim jurists about whether or not one or the other enactments of Majlis, the Iranian parliament, complies with Sharia. In Egypt, from 1972, there was a Supreme Constitutional Court which was supposed and did a great job in arriving at judicial opinions that are in compliance with Sharia, with Islamic law. You can imagine after 15 years, the Mubarak regime thwarted the Supreme Constitutional Court because it rendered several opinions and verdicts in protection of individuals' rights. So there is the sense about Islamic law as a legal system is that it is all about 5 objectives, major objectives, reliance to the text of the Quran, and through human intellect, through human reason, and not calling them the words of God. So, a civil law or a religious law in Islamic law, in Islamic civilization, is not that far from each other. They are very close, except, as I said, in the worshiping duties, which we all believe in the pillars of Islam. We all believe on 5 pillars of Islam, and we all perform as we all accept, with very, very minor differences in minute things.
Thank you. The book I recommended to you, What Do Muslims Really Think, by John Esposito. Okay, Undoubtedly got it. Anyway, it's an outstanding book. It asks Muslims across the world, what would you rather have to govern you?
Would you rather have an Islamic leader over you, a religious person over you to govern you, or would you like to have a secular person over you to govern your country? And across the board, the majority of Muslims said we want the secular person. We want our imam in our mosque to guide us spiritually, but we want an educated, democratically elected person to be over us. That goes against what the prejudice is out there, is that Muslims want to take over the world and want their leaders to rule us. Well, that's not what across the world Muslims have supported. Last week I was out at an iftar at the Corona Mosque, and a friend of mine showed up, a fellow Latter-day Saint, came in the door, and he looked a little, he and his wife looked a little frightened, and I went up to them and welcomed them in, and they'd never been in a mosque before. And when we sat down at the table, he turned to me and he says, "Is this one of those Sharia mosques?" And I said, "What do you mean by Sharia?" "Well, you know, those mosques that want to get Sharia law established in our country." And I said, "Do you know what Sharia means?" And he said, "Well, it means Islamic law, doesn't it?" And I said, "Sharia means God's law. It means that they want God's principles, godly principles, to be interwoven in the laws of our country. Do you want biblical laws, the Christian laws, interwoven into the principles of Christianity, interwoven in the laws of our country?" And he said, "Certainly." And I said, "You know, if you compare what most Muslims say are God's laws and what you say, the basic principles, I found to be very similar." And they're saying the same thing that you want, that those basic principles of justice and of freedom and of respect, etc., that we find in our religion to be part of our legal system. And that's all Sharia means. And he said, "Really?" And we began to talk. But again, it's ignorance. People don't know what these code words mean as they're throwing them around to strike fear in people. And as Latter-day Saints, as Catholics, as Jewish people, as Muslims, we need to educate our neighbors.
I want to attend your Sharia church. I think both Dr. Boozari and Steve Gilliland explained it very well. Let me just reinforce a couple points. In terms of the goals of Sharia, as Dr. Boozari said, it's to secure and develop rights to life, the intellect, faith, family, and property. This is similar to what we find in our own American framework for independence, the Declaration of Independence, that this is intended for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So when we talk about the goals of Sharia and our own Declaration of Independence in America, they are one and the same. And it's because we are human that we seek freedom. Every human being is born with the Spirit of God breathed into that person. This is our Islamic understanding. It is in the Quran. And so, with the Spirit of God, therefore every human being is pursuing God, or pursuing that road, that path to the waterhole, that sense of spirituality, and to the truth. So when I see the people on the streets of Cairo, and the streets of Tripoli, and the streets of Damascus, and in Bahrain, and in Yemen, demonstrating, working, striving to liberate themselves, I see in that the Spirit of God, and that is the spirit of freedom. That is what we are supposed to be working for. If we are not working for that, then I don't want to be a part of any faith that has nothing to do with freedom or justice. Right? And as the Quran said, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْمِيزَانَ لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. We have sent messengers in a clear way for articulating what we are saying, and with the book and the balance, so that people will establish justice. That is the Sharia to me. It is intended so that I can establish justice, mercy, and compassion, which, as Steve said, are God's principles. And so with the Christians, and with the Jews, and with anyone that wants to work for justice, with the atheists, for goodness sake, and the agnostics, those who work for justice and freedom, I am partners with them. And those that work against justice and freedom, I am against them, even if they claim to be of my own faith. So, here is the hard part, brothers and sisters. A lot of this misinformation, let us face it, comes from the behavior of Muslims themselves, from the Muslim world. Why are many of us here? Many of us here are here because either we or our parents fled the Muslim world. They fled the tyranny and the oppression and the exploitation of religion in the Muslim world. And the people that are demonstrating in the streets of the Arab countries today are demonstrating not only against the governments, but against the religious tyranny as well. And we have to come to terms with that. And so we ourselves, as Dr. Boozari articulated, are reframing the essence of Islam in a free society. Whereas we see it the way it has been for centuries, where it was misused and exploited. And let us remember the great decision of Imam Ja'far as-Sadegh, who is the father of all the schools of thoughts in Islam. When he was given the opportunity to take power, he declined that power because he wanted to preserve the separation of the scholars and the state. What we have today is either the ulama are the state, or there's an unholy alliance between the ulama and the state. And that has corrupted much of the religious understanding. And so we have this kind of exploitation and injustice against people who differ with the state or with the ruling class, that somehow there's a religious authority with the class that rules. Or there's an exploitation and a suppression of women because they represent half the population, and it is easier to control a society when you suppress half the population. And we also have problems in terms of dealing with religious minorities in those Muslim countries. So if we want really the principles of Sharia to be the principles of mercy, compassion, and justice, then we have to be critical of ourselves first, and then present that understanding to our own community and work for what is better, and therefore work with others in America to develop an Islamic understanding that belongs in a pluralistic and free society. And that's when we will flourish, and I think that's when we will be able to answer many of those people that are not necessarily xenophobes or racists against Muslims, but they have legitimate misapprehensions about Islam and Muslims. And we are the ones that can answer those questions, but we have to answer it within ourselves first. And so let me end with another important Quranic understanding, that we are not into religious conversion, we are into social conversion. Religious conversion is up to God and the individual. It is not our business. It is not our jurisdiction. But social conversion, to make the enemy into a friend, to develop injustice, to work against injustice for justice, that is our mandate. As the Quran says, لا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. Evil and good are not equal, so repel evil with that which is better, so that the one with whom there is enmity becomes as if he is your closest friend. So take the Christians and the Jews and others who are against us now or have misapprehensions, and let us work to convert them to mutual understanding and mutual respect for one another.
This is indeed a question that I face every time I give a presentation on Islam to one of our Catholic congregations. And Professor, I thank you for the rather concise and exacting description of what Sharia law is and isn't. I should invite you to join me when I make these presentations. You make my life much easier if they could hear that from you and not just from me. You may or may not be aware that the Catholic Church also has a law called Canon Law. Canon Law governs life within the Catholic Church. It governs those who govern within the church and those who are members of the church. And interestingly, it covers many of the same 5 areas that you described. Certainly, it details in there are continued attempts to have me become a canon lawyer by members of the church. I have resisted this. That's not my field, don't worry. I'm not interested in becoming a law professor. But they still wish me to do this. The canon law covers the obligations and the rights of laity within the Catholic Church. It covers the obligations and rights of clergy within the Catholic Church. It covers property issues within the Catholic Church. It covers family life within the Catholic Church. It covers marriage within the Catholic Church. And there are innumerable canons or laws within that body of canon law, which governs who can be married, who cannot be married within the Catholic Church. What about people who separate, annulments, processes, all these type of things. So we do have our own law. There is, however, no concept of making that law the standard law for everyone, anywhere. That's not to say that certain aspects of that law, especially when we find that certain aspects of our law in conflict with civil laws in certain areas, a bone of contention. For example, the definition of human life. When does human life begin? For the Catholic Church, it begins at the moment of conception. So the civil laws, especially in this country now and in much of Europe, that allow abortions, we would be opposed to that. So there's an aspect of our law that we would find in conflict with civil law. The definition of marriage is who can be married and who cannot be. The whole Proposition 8 that we went through here in California, these things are then in opposition to our canon law and our teachings of our church, and we are opposed to those, and we argue in the civil arena about those things. But there's no attempt to impose all of Catholic canon law on civil society here today. Thank you.
If I were to take the word Sharia and substitute the word halakha, I could just simply repeat what has been said here. The word halakha means the same thing as the word Sharia. It means to be on the way, to be in the path. So I don't need to repeat what my colleagues have said. I would put forward a couple of challenges, since I get to be the last one on this question. One, I think my colleagues have made their work a little too easy. The claim about Sharia law in the American public is reminiscent of the claim that was made against Jews. Here we could go back to the first question, that is that Sharia law is primarily an attempt to fiscally take over America, the banking system, etc. That is the major claim that I read in the press that I read. I read the Christian Right press right after I read the daily Torah portion. I have to strengthen myself and then I go. I'm looking at my colleagues because maybe they're reading different parts of these claims. So I want people to know that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a forgery. If you don't know that as a believing Muslim, then you are on the side of the people who believe that Sharia law is an attempt to take over the world. This notion that Sharia is somehow a threat is out of the same cloth. This is one instance where anti-Semitism and Islamophobia do converge. And what this charge against Sharia is really about is it's just a little bit of warmed over 19th century BS. I think I can use that word safely. And so I think we should make common cause. We should understand that in the nation that has allowed the invasion of the Christian right into the secular bodies of America, and has allowed the notion that there could be serious political candidates in the other party that is not the Democrats, in the nation where there is a governor who holds a rally using state funds, which is called The Response, but is essentially a revival, and calls for the conversion of Jews to the one true faith as the beginning of the salvation of humanity. In the nation where that kind of rhetoric goes on unchallenged, then it is very conceivable that you can say things like Sharia law is somehow a threat to America. Because in this process of baptizing America, which some parts of the Christian world have begun to try to do in America, and unfortunately now in Europe as well, we have, I think, the greatest threat. I do not look at what happened in Norway as an aberration. I do not look at what happened in Oklahoma as an aberration. It is not accidental that the people who were finally charged in the burning of the Oregon mosque called themselves Christian warriors. And the language of Christian warriors and crusades, etc., is part of this notion that we, of course, are going to fight anything that's different from us, even if we don't understand what it is that we're talking about. We're going to talk about it as if we do. Happily, I want to suggest a couple of very positive things. Jewish law, Muslim law grew up together. They are twins. The terms that we use in Jewish law, ma'arufia, are the same terms that are used in Arabic law and Muslim law. And I suggest that in America we start a Beit Midrash, or Midrasa, if you need the translation, where we study our law together. The Jews learn from the Muslims, and the Muslims learn from the Jews, and that we discuss and understand this very important spiritual path. Because, and this now is a little polemical, beg forgiveness of...
Given.
Yeah. Every society that is a sane society, and I think that Jewish society and Islamic societies were on the whole sane, sought to gird their expressions of faith with real actions in the real world. There was never a question in classical Jewish sources, and without knowing all the sources, and I'm happy to have a correction, I don't think there was a question in Islamic law that you could have faith and not works. That the two went together. And that when my colleague, my fellow Arizonan, calls for the transformation of society, that is what halakha is about, and that's what Sharia is about. But that, again, as I started to say, does not excuse us from the responsibility of understanding how people who have purposely misunderstood what Sharia is about and what halakha is about, from we do need to understand what they're saying, even though they're wrong. I'll tell you one more thing about Jewish law. and how Jewish law and Islamic law converge. I'm proud to announce that there will be kosher meat in Poland. Now, before you run out and buy a ticket to go buy kosher meat, let me tell you how you get kosher meat in Poland. You go to the local Turkish abattoir, and you bring a person who's trained to make the meat kosher from Tunisia, from Jerba. You bring them to Poland, and they do their work in the Muslim-owned halal place. Now, these are all things that are governed by law. These are all things that are governed by how Muslims do things when they seek to have halal. And I think that all these everyday practices of ours, how we eat, what is proper to eat, how do we pay our employees a fair wage, do we pay the people who work in the fields on time, and do we give them working conditions that are appropriate? This is Sharia. This is halakha. And I think we have not yet begun the wonderful task of reintroducing the true meaning of halakha and the true meaning of Sharia into the societies that we're a part of. One final note, it's going to do Muslims a lot of good to be a minority here in America, because we began to take Jewish law seriously when we were a minority. And we're going to have a wonderful conversation together about these issues. And I look forward to Muslim scholars supporting Jewish scholars. Just recently there was this whole issue of, can you outlaw circumcision in San Francisco and in Santa Monica? And I sat in on a conversation that I had not planned to be a part of, and there is Salam, the gentleman who's just down the table here, defending this issue. And, you know, obviously this was a common issue that we had together, Jews and Muslims. And I think this is a wonderful thing that we were able to do in the name of our traditions that respect the fact that being a religious person is not just what you say you believe, but how you actually bring that into everyday life. Thank you.
Just one minor point I just wanted to make, because Rabbi Haim Beliak gave us a challenge. There is a statue of the Prophet Muhammad in the U.S. Supreme Court. How many people were aware of that? Sheriff Baca was. He's an A+ civics student. But most people are unaware of that. There's been a statue of Prophet Muhammad for, I would say, almost 100 years now. And some Muslims wanted to take it down because they didn't want an image of the Prophet. Well, they petitioned the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at that time was William Rehnquist. And they asked him to take it down. And there was Muhammad with Solomon, with Moses, with so many other lawgivers in history in the Supreme Court that is actually overlooking the justices in their room for deliberation. It's right in the center there. And so Chief Rehnquist told the Muslims, we are not going to take the statue down because Muhammad has made important contributions to the history of law. And we in America take from that understanding of law and develop our own corpus of jurisprudence. So even Chief Rehnquist is going to be opposed to these people of a quote-unquote Sharia takeover. And when we make the Pledge of Allegiance in America, it is the same as making a pledge to God. We cannot break our promises if we want to be observant and good Muslims. And so our commitment is to the U.S. Constitution, based on the understanding of Sharia. That is something that Americans need to know. And the only way for them to need to know is to say it, and all of you should have all of us should take the responsibility of saying that that our commitment is to the U.S. Constitution based on our understanding of Islam. And even the Chief Justice has made Islamic law and Prophet Muhammad a part of the history of law in the United States of America.